Right now, inside your home, something is happening that you don't notice. That parrot, whether it's perched in its cage or sitting on your shoulder, never forgets the face of a single person who enters your life. Not randomly, and certainly not based on a vague sense that someone is here. It records exactly who they are, what they mean to you and to the parrot, and how the parrot should behave toward you. Every time a guest comes to the house, every time a family member walks through the door, a file silently opens inside that little brain, and this information is filed away. And when you learn today what this information really means, you'll never look at that bird the same way again. Welcome to the Parrot's Mind. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe, because what you'll learn today will completely change the way you view that bird in your home. We'll discuss the 6 signs that parrots display regarding facial recognition. You'll learn what each one really means and how you and your loved ones are perceived in the parrot's mind. The 4th sign touches on a behavior that most owners experience without realizing it, but which scientists have long been unable to explain, so don't miss that part. And the 6th, the final sign, the one that changes everything, is waiting for you at the end of the video, so stick with me until the very end. Rest assured, by the time this video ends, you'll no longer see that bird at home as just a feathered friend, but as a little mind that has formed a real bond with you. The 1st sign is that the parrot's reaction is never neutral when a new person comes to the house for the first time. Watch carefully the next time you bring a friend, a relative, or a close acquaintance you haven't seen in a long time to your home for the first time. The parrot will either back away, lower its voice, tilt its head to the side, and stare intently at that person for a long time, or, on the contrary, immediately show interest, make noises, and try to get closer to the edge of the cage. This reaction is not random. Parrot researcher Irene Pepperberg's years-long studies on Alex, a grey parrot, revealed that parrots can distinguish not only objects and colors, but also individual humans, and can develop consistent, personalized responses toward them. The same is true for your parrot. When it sees a new face, it quietly assesses the person, gauging their tone of voice, speed of movement, and proximity to you, and once this assessment is made, it doesn't change easily. In other words, those first 5 minutes serve as a sort of test for your guest, and most of the time we aren't even aware of it. In fact, some owners notice that the attitude their parrots display towards certain people from the very first moment strangely aligns with their own first impressions of those people, as if the bird were picking up on something much more quickly than human intuition can perceive, but has not yet been able to put into words. The 2nd sign is that when the same person comes back, you see that the parrot hasn't forgotten them. Even if it's been months since the first visit, when that person walks through the door, the parrot's reaction is just like it was on the first day, as if no time had passed at all. It might turn its head to look at them, change the tone of its voice, or even make a special call just for that person. Researchers have observed that parrots' long-term memory is much stronger than people realize, and that emotionally significant memories, in particular, can be retained for years. This means your parrot keeps a sort of social notebook in its head, with a separate person, a separate note, and a separate category on every page. That's why even an uncle, a friend, or a former neighbor who visits years later still holds a place in the parrot's memory. Even if you forget, it never does. What's interesting is that this memory seems to store not only the information about who came, but also the emotional tone of the moment spent with that person. In other words, it may encode not just the face, but also the voice and movements associated with that face, and even the overall atmosphere of that day as a whole, which shows that parrot's memory works in a much more layered way than we realize. The 3rd sign becomes apparent when you notice how the parrot behaves toward you and the other family members at home. If you watch closely, you'll see that the parrot keeps its interactions with you completely separate from those with your sibling or spouse. Maybe it says a special word to you, maybe it makes a certain sound only when you enter the room, or maybe it runs to the cage door when it hears your voice, but doesn't react the same way to someone else's voice. This distinction isn't a coincidence, it's the result of a conscious classification. The parrot categorizes every person in the house as a distinct individual and develops a different social strategy for each one, just as people speak differently to different friends and use different tones. The parrot has, in fact, committed the entire social map of your home to memory, and it has already decided exactly where you fit into it. And this map isn't static, it's constantly being updated. If one day you act differently than usual, if you're more tired, more irritable, or quieter, the parrot notices this too and adjusts its response for that day accordingly. That's why those moments when you wonder, why is it acting so strange today, are actually proof of just how closely your parrot is observing you. The fourth sign is noticing that the parrot's attitude towards someone it dislikes or doesn't trust hardly changes at all. If it acts aloof toward a person from the very first day, this attitude usually persists. No matter how polite that person is, no matter how often they offer food with their hand, the parrot maintains its cautious demeanor. This sometimes truly surprises their owners because, from a human perspective, there seems to be no apparent reason for it. But a parrot's memory takes that first impression much more seriously. Maybe a tone of voice, maybe a sudden movement, maybe the glint of glasses, whatever it is. Once it's recorded, it isn't easily erased. Experts describe this as a kind of early warning system. The parrot stores a signal it perceives as risky deep in its memory so it will never forget it. And this is part of its survival strategy. So if your parrot is acting cold towards someone, there's definitely a reason, you just might not be able to see it. Some owners, years later, when they experience a truly negative incident involving that person, share their astonishment by saying, "It turns out my parrot was right all along." Of course, we're not presenting this as a definitive ability to predict the future, but it's hard to ignore the existence of an attention to detail that's far sharper than the human eye. The fifth sign, the excitement a parrot shows when it sees someone it hasn't seen in a long time, is truly a sight to behold. Whether it's a family member returning home after years away, an owner coming back from a trip, or a friend visiting after a long absence, the reaction observed in parrots when they encounter these people is far more than just a casual greeting. Raising its voice, spreading its wings, repeating the same word or sound over and over, ruffling its feathers, and pacing back and forth with excitement, all of these are interpreted as a strong recognition and even a kind of expression of longing. Some owners describe how, when they return from a long trip, their parrots are almost too excited to speak and keep repeating the same sound over and over. This shows that your parrot isn't just having a momentary reaction, but that it has a bond that has built up over time, growing layer by layer. For a bird to remember a person for such a long time is actually no small feat. On the contrary, it's a sign of quite an impressive cognitive capacity. Think about it. Even you might struggle to clearly recall the face of someone you saw just once years ago, but to your parrot, that person is still familiar, still special, and still someone worthy of being greeted. This is proof of a deep bond carried by a small brain. The sixth and final sign is the most profound of all. When someone you love can no longer come home, the parrot notices. Perhaps it looks at the chair where that person used to sit. Perhaps it repeats the words that person used to say over and over again. Or perhaps it acts more restless, quieter, and more withdrawn than usual. Science doesn't tell us that parrots understand loss exactly the same way humans do. We can't claim that with absolute certainty. But we do know that these birds' memory, their capacity to form bonds, and their consistent behavior towards specific people are strong enough for them to sense that something is missing. And there are stories that many owners have been telling for years. They describe how, after the loss of a loved one, a parrot behaves as if searching for that person for days or even weeks, imitating their voice, repeating a phrase they used to say together over and over again, and appearing restless. I'm not presenting this as a scientific certainty. Researchers remain cautious on this subject, and rightly so. But there are thousands of people who share these stories, and they all say they felt the same strange sensation as if that bird knew something. If you've ever had a moment when you felt your parrot was missing someone, don't dismiss that feeling or tell yourself, "I'm overthinking this," because everything suggests that the bird in your home sees, remembers, and carries with it far more than you realize. Perhaps that's why some owners say their parrots aren't just pets, but silent witnesses to the family, witnesses who notice every person who comes and goes, every change, and every empty chair. Perhaps that's why some people stay home a little longer with their parrots after a difficult loss, because even in that bird's silence, they sense a kind of understanding, a bond that can't be put into words but is felt. There's no exact scientific explanation for this, but the fact that so many people share the same feeling is too consistent to be a coincidence. Maybe one day science will prove exactly how this bond works, or maybe it never will, but no one has the right to say that what you feel when you look into that bird's eyes in that moment isn't real. Now I'd like to ask you, how did your parrot react when it first saw someone new? Or have you ever had a moment that truly surprised you when it saw someone it hadn't seen in a long time? Share your stories in the comments. I read every single one. And if someone came to mind while watching this video, maybe now is the perfect time to share this with them, because sometimes even a small reminder is enough to help you rediscover that bond. Thank you for joining us on The Parrot's Mind. See you in the next video.